This is a theory that I've got about the Beatles, so I called it Beatles Theory. A lot of people seem to think that Paul McCartney and John Lennon hated each other, were competitive, and that Yoko was a pesky nuisance as well. The Yoko thing, that's mostly racism and sexism too. Paul and John are on the record as having had a bit of hang time through the 70s, a spectacularly awful drunken jam, a night where they watched SNL together, thought about going to the studio to claim the joke cheque, $3,000 or whatever it was, that Lorne Michaels held aloft, but they just got high instead. John and Paul would fire some barbs at one another or get the press to do it on their behalf. But they also visited and talked and thought often about recording together again. John heard McCartney too, or at least heard coming up. He pulled to the side of the road, loved it, said something like, "Paul's back." John would be back too, soon. He'd be starting over. The sadness, of course, was that was number one with a bullet. But the real thing no one talks about is how George and Ringo kind of grew to hate Paul the most. And I know why. And here's the theory. They were the ones that Paul could do without. He could replace them. He could at the least approximate them. They knew it, kinda. He knew it, certainly. He played drums on some Beatles tracks, Dear Prudence and Back in the USSR are good starters. He played some killer lead guitar too. Fucking Taxman, mate. Fucking owning it. He had more than once told George and Ringo how to play their parts. He came up with suggestions, arrangements, and it drove them crazy. And then when they were all cast as professional Beatles in the docos, you could see sometimes that they were seething. Paul struts in like David Brent or Noel Edmonds doing a dance with the camera, says, "Hello, Georgie boy, my love," and tussles his hair to remind him, even in his 50s, he's still and always 2 years younger. George grimaces through the hug, shrugs, says, "I didn't know they made vegetarian leather jackets." In another scene, Ringo is tapping on his knees as Paul and George mug it up on the ukes. Ringo says that he just likes hanging out. He's got his pals. Prior to this, he was not doing coke anymore with the Fat Controller. He's heartfelt. He fucking means it. Paul talks over him, makes a gag and makes George gag. Now, Lennon was a rough as shit guitarist, but he had something when he'd hit those strings, the baggage, the grit, a cynicism and such wit. He was a wife beater. He even hid that inside a song. He tried a few mea culpas and far too many margaritas. He was a drunk. He was hurting. He was a child for far too long. But he was punk as fuck, and he was, when it suited, the leader of the band. Paul never forgot that. Just as Ringo and George never forgot that Paul, bless him, a genius, the greatest melodicist, a jobbing writer to put all others to shame, had told them that they were not only nothing, they were something he could do himself. They smiled for the cameras, threw peace signs. Ringo's doing it still. But I reckon there's more than one reason he always wears sunglasses. And George went to his grave never turning up at a McCartney jam.